Welcome to Sweet Valley Diaries, the podcast where fitting in with the normal kids isn't all it's cracked up to be. Book number 53, Second Chance.
Will a normal life make Kristin Thompson happy?
Hi, everybody. All this talk about normalcy. Normal. Are we tired of it yet? Hi, everybody. I'm Marissa Flaxbart, your host. Welcome to Sweet Valley Diaries, the podcast where we talk about Sweet Valley High novels and also just kind of the world and life and stuff. And I am joined once again by our old friend, Katie LaDue. Hi, Katie.
Hi. You can't hear me giving a thumbs up, but I'm giving a thumbs up.
That's true. As long as you describe that you're doing it, then it's the same diff. I mean, you could not give a thumbs up and be like, I'm giving a thumbs up right now, everybody. And they wouldn't even know. Gladiators, we could trick you.
I'm not lying. I'm not a liar.
She is not. I can actually see her this time. We read a book today called Second Chance, and Kristin Thompson is the main character. This is squarely within the realm of Parade of Randos, and if you didn't listen carefully to our episode about Book 52, you will never have heard of Kristin Thompson before.
I mean, not only have I never heard of her, but seemingly no one else has.
Yeah, that's true. So in Sweet Valley High, it's like she goes to the school, but she's so disconnected from the world of the students that at one point early on in the book, she says to Elizabeth, "Oh, I haven't seen you in a couple weeks," which gives us a clue. I guess it's been a couple weeks since the end of the last book. She also has no clue. It says at one point in this book, we'll get there, but just as a little tease, that she never heard anybody say anything bad about Bruce Patman. So she's like, oh, does he have a reputation? So Bruce Patman is going to play a role. Elizabeth Wakefield, of course, will play a role. But why don't we describe Kristin Thompson as depicted on the cover of the book?
She kind of looks like a Barbie doll, but with a nice twiggy pixie cut.
Yeah, she's like an angry Barbie doll. Doesn't she look angry?
A little. She looks serious.
I think that's her determined pro face, right? Because a big aspect of Kristin Thompson's character is that she is never let them see you sweat. She's really connected to the idea of maintaining a strong exterior.
So obviously she's in a tennis uniform.
Yeah, she's got a little tennis whites, probably a skirt, a little cute red lining on the collar, and I think she looks a lot like Molly Ringwald. Maybe it's just the haircut.
Yeah.
A lot might be an overstatement.
Yeah. She looks very serious.
Definitely. Katie, usually when you are a guest on Sweet Valley Diaries, we are discussing something in the realm of Stephen Wakefield and Kara Walker. So how does it feel to kind of branch out beyond those boundaries?
I was very confused by how little anyone knew her.
Kristin Thompson.
My roommate, Shay Zanotti, who has been a guest on the podcast.
That's right.
Also established that she was a childhood lover of Sweet Valley High. So very, very well versed. And she said, which one are you reading? And I said, oh, it's about this girl. And she was like, I said, Kristin Thompson. She's like, oh, I think she's a rando. And I started telling about her, with Bruce Patman. And she was like, how does she not know his reputation? And I was like, Sam, it's ridiculous. How would she not know?
And yet she doesn't. But at this point in the podcast, we are at a point where I don't know what's going to happen exactly in these books. So I'm really relying on the descriptions on the back of the books. I don't want to spoil them for myself too much. So, I mean, I could go to Goodreads and I could read reviews, or on Amazon, I could find out about the books if I wanted to. But I'm trying to limit myself a little bit because, it's kind of fun to not know what's going to happen. And in this book, I actually was really surprised by the turns that it took. When I read that it was going to be a book about a tennis player who really was thinking maybe she's missing out by not being part of the normal high school life, and that she was going to get interested in Bruce Patman, it was just like, okay, I can see exactly how this book is going to play out. You know, she's going to ruin her life over Bruce Patman and then have to redeem herself at the last minute. And that's, you know, that would not, I don't think that's exactly what happened. Like, that's not really how I would describe it. And so I found myself getting kind of excited about some of the choices that she made. And also I was surprised by how long it took Bruce Patman to even like enter the scene in this book. Because where we start with this book is with Enid and Elizabeth, and they are working on this big sister program. Enid has arranged for a bunch of the girls in the junior class, I guess, to be paired up with these like 10-year-old girls as big sisters.
Well, I don't know how it is in yours, but so the Kindle edition gives me like a teaser page. So it has like Kristen's dad is like waiting for her in the living room, and she comes in late and he says, I've been worried sick and you promised me you'd be back in an hour, and then you show up 3 hours late. And Kristen, take a deep breath. We ended up going somewhere different. And he says he's disappointed in her. And that's just like one page little teaser.
Sure, yeah. These books always have a page at the beginning before they start that like comes from somewhere inside the book that I actually usually skip it because it's like, I'm going to get to that page eventually.
Well, okay. So also to preface this by like, I have an iPad, so I'm using the Kindle app, use it a bunch of times. I have an Apple Pencil, relatively new to the Apple Pencil life, if you will. And when I used it before, it didn't have the like scribble.
Oh, it's a relatively new feature that the Apple Pencil can do more stuff on your iPad.
And I hadn't used it in a long time, and it was like, hey, try Scribble. And I'm like, okay, I can scroll, whatever. I highlight in the Kindle the stuff. And I was like, oh, you can add notes. And I was like, oh. So I've added a lot of chaotic notes.
Excellent. Bringing that chaotic note energy to Sweet Valley Diaries book 53.
Because normally I just have like a sheet of paper that I write all my chaotic notes on, but this time I did it in.
It's ironic because usually I have a notes app, Chaotic Note, and I actually have a piece of paper that I decided to write on this time. So we've swapped roles.
My first note was in the preview page where she said, we ended up going somewhere different than ... And I wrote, ooh, where did they go? Do people have sex in these books?
Oh, a big question before the book even gets started.
I didn't know.
I think nobody really knows. It doesn't really get described. There's a lot of hinting at maybe things that are happening, but it certainly doesn't happen in this book. I think we can rest assured.
Okay.
So it's almost as if the books are existing in a sort of ignorance about what making out actually leads to. And maybe that's by design, because if you are young enough that you're not really aware of that either, then your brain isn't going to go there. But if you're old enough that you do know, then your brain does go there. So it's like all-purpose writing style. But what I mean is, wouldn't you agree that in this book there's no sex? Like, once you got to that passage.
Yeah, of course not. No.
And it's actually kind of great. So we've got to work our way there, though. I know that's like one of the most exciting parts of the whole book is the way that the Kristen and Bruce relationship ends up unfolding, such as it is. But at the start of the book, we've just got Enid and Elizabeth and the Big Sisters program that Enid has spearheaded. And Mr. Collins has made a return. Mr. Collins had not appeared in one of these books for a while, but he has really gone his best behavior, and we do not get a Collins watch, I'm afraid, in this book. But he is here. So like I am watching and noticing that he exists again, which I really appreciate.
So I usually like to bring it back to my TV teen drama knowledge.
Yeah.
So this is my one contribution in this one that I would like to bring up. So the whole thing is like one of the main crux of this one is this Sweet Valley High Big Sister Little Sister program. Mm-hmm. In season 3 of Dawson's Creek, Pacey participated in a Big Brother Big Sister program. But, you know, his was like community service. But the little brother was played by Jonathan Lipnicki, which I think is,
wow,
you know, just like chef's kiss.
Well, I'll have to hunt that down. And was that a multi-episode storyline. I was definitely watching the show Dawson's Creek during season 3, but I don't remember that at all.
So season 3 is like when Pacey slowly realizes that he's in love with Joey.
Mm-hmm.
And basically spends the entire season pining after her.
Yes, this is ringing a bell. This dynamic, even though I do not remember Big Brother, Little Brother. And it sounds like that is the only connection that we have to a Second Chance.
Yeah. He ends up getting, because there was a weird storyline in the beginning and they completely let go of that Joey was a painter.
Yeah.
And then in season 3, she gets the opportunity to paint a school mural. And then this bully ends up destroying her mural. And then he gets into a fight with the bully for destroying her mural. And then he gets like community service or like school community service. And he has to do the Big Brother.
Sounds like that would make a great Sweet Valley High novel. Anyway, basically at the start of the book, Elizabeth and Enid are talking through the plans that Enid's made, like which of these girls that the Big Sister, Little Sister program has given her. She's like heading the program. And so like which of the girls have big sisters that they're paired up with and who is still remaining. And they find out that there's this little girl named Emily Brown whose mother recently died in a car crash. And she is, I don't know, having a really hard time, but apparently really likes tennis. And they're like, oh, light bulb. We know somebody who's really good at tennis. Oh, but she's so busy. Elizabeth kind of says to Enid, like, there's really no harm in asking and seeing if she'd be interested in helping this girl. So here is the introduction of Kristin Thompson. Elizabeth barely knew Kristen. Very few people were close to Kristen because she was so dedicated to tennis that she didn't have time for anything or anyone else. But people who knew her were aware that Kristen was already a high-caliber tennis player who wanted to be on the pro circuit. Kristen's in my math class. I've talked to her a couple of times, about assignments and stuff. She's probably a very nice person, but there's an aloof quality about her. She seems so bent on succeeding that she refuses to be friendly. I think if she had friends, it would mean too much time away from tennis. So that's our main character of the series' opinion on this new character, Kristen. Like that's the vibe that she's giving off.
I had like a couple highlighted things. Elizabeth says, I've seen her practicing out in the courts and she's super determined. Jeffrey, remember when we invited her to the beach recently on that incredibly hot day? She was really nice, but she wouldn't come because she had a tennis lesson. Like, I was like, that is so much exposition. Like,
yeah, that is a description. Remember? That's a description of a scene that happened at the end of book 52. So they're like catching you up.
In a conversation?
Yeah.
That is so weird to be like, remember all of the events of that one day.
Do you remember? Yeah, 2 weeks ago we were both there and this happened and this happened. Yeah. But now you're up to speed, even if you didn't read book 52. And I mean, there's more kind of exposition that only with the power of retrospect that we know what's going on here. We find out that a little bit of foreshadowing that Jessica and AJ have been arguing more lately, which is never shown to us in this book. Like, we never see Jessica and AJ argue in book 53, but it tells us at the top that they're going to argue. Why does it do that? Because that's going to be important for the next book. Then a few pages later, this character we've never heard of before named Shelley Novak walks into the library, sees Kristin Thompson, and relates to her about being into sports. And she's like, I really love to play basketball, but I don't want to go pro. You're really cool. You're Kristin Thompson. You're great in X, Y, and Z ways. So it's like simultaneously exposition dump about Kristin Thompson and how great she is at tennis. I almost said soccer. We've had some soccer books recently. But then it's also a plant for Shelley Novak, who in 2 books from now is going to be the rando in question. So lots of seeds being planted. Does Shelley Novak come back in this book? She does not. I actually think it's kind of a perfect example of how, the very unique way in which these books are serialized. There's rarely a cliffhanger, but they're just sort of overlapping themes, overlapping moments, where you get a little drop in one book that's a tease for the next one.
So they have the scene where she's in the library and Shelley Novak comes to find her and talk to her. You just talked about. Mm-hmm. And it said, Kristen always ate lunch quickly and then hurried to the library to do her work. If she spent a lunch hour socializing, it would mean she lost an hour of practice after school, which I highlighted. And I was like, that's terrible. And that sounds like it sucks.
I'm so glad you read that passage, Katie, because when I read it, I was just like, like there was this like gut-wrenching feeling of like a little bit of recognition, but also like, oh, that's so bad already. Like she's already on that like grind that I feel like in the 21st century is so familiar to probably adults and teenagers alike, of like, I gotta keep going, can't stop for a second. If I don't multitask, which, I mean, the fight against the myth of multitasking is something that I live with in my life every day. Like, you can't really do two things at once. So, you know, she's scarfing down her food and trying to write a paper about the American dream. And she's not is she successful in writing the paper? No, probably because it's lunchtime and she should be focused on eating lunch. But
I mean, it definitely reminded me of like a bit of being in high school. Like, I definitely wouldn't have left lunch to go do my homework.
Yeah.
But I was a theater kid.
Same.
My school did 2 plays a year. I either was in or worked on every single one of them all 4 years.
Wow.
And it was a lot of hours. It was like every night. It was normally about like 6 to 9. When it got closer, it was even longer hours, and it was, you know, weekends as well and stuff, whatever. But like on weekdays, if I had homework, I had to make sure like as soon as school was over, I would be like, I have to get my homework done because I'm not going to have any time to do it later. So I relate to that.
Well, it's funny. I would say that I had a very similar feeling reading this, in that I was like, oh man, yeah, in high school, I was so busy. I was always juggling various after school activities, whether it was show choir or speech and debate or theater or, I don't know, orchestra or some other kind of thing that was going on in my life, and schoolwork. I mean, I guess the reason I even bring it up is that I was thinking like, wow, even as busy as I was, even like I had a couple times, I pulled my first all-nighter in middle school. Like even as hard as I was working, I still didn't do my homework during lunch. Like I didn't like that was an actually fairly important social time. Like this is like the 50 minutes or whatever that you get to like catch up with your friends during the school day. Anyway, I related to that. One of the reasons that Kristen is so busy in this book is that she's always got, like every day after school at 3:30, she's got this tennis practice. And we know it's at 3:30 because at one point during the book, her tennis coach, Dory, is going to be an hour late. And Kristen is like excited at the idea of having an hour to herself, but immediately is like, now I don't know what to do with myself. And that also was just like upsettingly familiar. That like, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm not really like that, but I have had that feeling of like a free day where you're like so looking forward to it, and then it comes and it's just like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But she is specifically getting ready for something called the Avery Cup. So I'll just explain it real quick because it is important to the plot that there are a bunch of qualifying matches for this thing called the Avery Cup. And the Avery Cup is like your chance to go from being like pro-am or like amateur to being a pro. There's this guy named Nick Wiley who I guess has a team of young tennis players that he takes on these matches all around. And you have to do well enough in the tournament. You have to win the tournament basically to get your slot in this team, Nick Wiley's team. So that's what she's working toward. And that's what's on her mind when Elizabeth Wakefield walks up to her and is like, hey, look, I know you're so busy, but let me tell you real quick about this little sister thing, because there is this girl who would be perfect for you. She tells her about Emily Brown. She tells her about how her mom died and how she loves tennis. It's the only thing that matters to her. And then Elizabeth walks away. And then we get this. She's riding her bike home after this conversation. Okay. The road swam before her in a blur of colors, and a car slammed on its horn as she rode too close to traffic. She had to breathe deeply to get back her control. She wished Elizabeth Wakefield hadn't told her about Emily Brown. No one at school was close enough to Kristen to know that her own mother had been killed in a plane crash when she was only 7. Kristen blinked furiously, trying as hard as she could to shut out the memory of that horrible day, 9 years ago now, when she had come home and found her father and Dory sitting in the living room, staring blankly at each other. "I can't tell her," her father had said, tears running down his face. "Tell me what?" Kristen had cried. It was as though part of her life had ended then, the part that had been filled with love, laughter, and happiness. After that, there was only one thing that mattered: winning tennis matches.
This is where one of my other chaotic notes was, which just said, highlighted, after that, there were only one thing that mattered, like winning tennis matches, because her love, laughter, and happiness was over. And I just wrote, Jesus Christ. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, and it's even more complicated, right? Because it turns out that her mom was on a plane to Wimbledon. Like, she was going to play in Wimbledon.
I thought she won Wimbledon.
No, she was on her way there. Like, she didn't get a chance to play. She says
at one point something about a photo of her mom holding the trophy.
Oh, well, no, she was like a trophy-winning tennis player. But
I was under the impression that she won.
I think it's an important aspect of the story that she never got the chance to win that. Like, that was her dream, and she never got that chance. Mm-hmm. Because that's a thing that sort of haunts Kristen, is that her mother was such a great player, and now it's like she's carrying the torch on, even though nobody really asked her to do that. And her dad owns a bunch of tennis clubs. Like, their lives are very enmeshed in tennis. Dory, who is her coach, was also like her mom's best friend. So it's all very enmeshed, and she's really serious, but she is starting to feel a little bit like the pressure is so high and she's losing some of the joy in it. And she's 16, right? She's starting to think like, well, what if there was anything else in my life other than tennis? Like, what if I had friends, maybe boys, that kind of thing. So she's riding to her tennis practice on her bike. She's like crying and like fighting back tears, and she gets to the tennis practice and her game is off. Like, she's kind of having a hard game. And Dory is like asking her, like, is anything wrong? Like, what's up? And she thinks to herself, Kristen had made it a rule never to show her father or Dory when she was feeling vulnerable and weak. Kristen tried hard to act like a pro on the court and off. That meant being tough, disciplined, as Dory said. A pro doesn't break down and cry just because she gets lonesome sometimes, Kristen reminded herself sternly. She steeled herself and said, let's keep going. I'm not leaving the court till I get my serve back.
I highlighted the last sentence on that page was, it was almost as if the lonely little girl had never grown up at all. Again, Jesus Christ, that's done.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, but Kristen, you're only 16. Like, you don't have to be an adult yet. It's okay. My heart broke for this girl.
Yeah, they're just like, I can't be ever show weakness or like, this is her family, basically.
Right. Well, and you can see how, I don't know, the very next chapter, Neil Thompson, her dad, gets introduced, and Neil and Dory are very much like, Kristen, you know, you've got to work hard if you want to win. Like, you've got this, like, you got to get your sleep, you got to eat well. But I felt like it was pretty clear to me that they were really just like being supportive of her goals. Like, they seemed fairly reasonable.
He even like, it's funny because like he would be on her, like her dad was often like on her about like, oh, like you have practice, like you have to do this, you have to do that. But at the same time, when she was like being over the top, he was like, no. Like, even like in this one where he says like, what do you want for dinner? And she's like, I'm just gonna have a grilled chicken salad, no dressing. You're gonna eat a dry salad.
This has been a conversation lately. We've been talking about food and diet both on the podcast, and I've had some conversations with listeners outside, like on social media, on Instagram, about some of the weird food stuff. But what you're talking about is a perfect example of like, okay, this is a reasonable guy. In this book, while Kristen is trying to not gain any weight before her match, and she's choosing to eat this chicken and the dry salad, the dad says, is that going to be enough food for you? You know, if you're worried about, you could eat vegetables like that, you know, you could add, that would give you more energy. They don't have to be fattening, you know. He's like trying to pay attention to her energy levels, but also being like, not trying to be a food pusher, you know. I feel like
he often comments like throughout the book, like, is she eating enough? Is she sleeping enough? Is she sleeping enough?
That's a big thing.
Is she not feeling well? Like all that stuff.
Yeah, he seems tuned into that. Now, that being said, I don't want to suggest, by any means, that the book is not portraying an accurate version of what a teenager like Kristen would be like. Like, I think that Kristen's reaction, like one of the things that she thinks is that when her dad tells her, don't forget to get to bed, or like, make sure you get home on time, it really pisses her off, because she's like, doesn't he realize that I know that? Like, this is important to me too. Like, I don't need him to also put this pressure on me. That was very relatable too. And that is like a realistic teen or even adult, you know, as an adult with your parents. Like, I don't think this is something that gets better. You know, when you're an adult and your parents tell you how to live your life, and in ways that, like, obviously it's hard not to feel.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I say that all the time. Like, every once in a while at the end of the month, my mom will be like, did you put the rent check in the mail? And I'm like,
that kind of thing. Exactly.
I'm a 31-year-old woman.
No, as listeners know very well, I have a wonderful relationship with my dad, but he'll still, like, if he'll say something to me on the phone, like, oh, you're going so-and-so, like, do you know where you're going to park? And it's just like, I know you're just trying to help, but, like, I'm 38 years old. I can figure out where to park my car.
Yeah, like, don't tell me how to prepare for something.
That's really it.
That I take care of myself, like, every day.
But it's like, you can't really interrogate that very much before you get to, like, oh, they're just far away and, like, have no way to help. So, like, of course they're going to make these suggestions. But anyway, Kristen, that's the pressure that, and poor Kristen is really, like, feeling that her, like, if she doesn't win the Avery Cup, like, if she doesn't win her matches, how disappointed are Dory and especially her father going to be? Like, do they even really, like, love her enough to love her beyond her skill as a tennis player? This is a literal thought that she has repeatedly throughout this book. And it's understandable that she gets there, because she is such a winner. Her life has been so all about tennis that she's never really gotten an opportunity to see that that's not where the love is coming from those people. It's not conditional at all. It's just that she's only been this tennis winner who cares all about tennis. So of course that's what they're focused on.
And she says, like, he starts asking her obviously, I don't think she feels, like, incredibly pressured by him, because, like, 2 pages later, when he does start asking her, she's like, oh my God, I don't need this from you. Like, I put enough pressure on myself. I don't need pressure coming from you. So to me, that tells me, like, if she's just constantly living under his, like, pressure and scrutiny, this would just be, like, par for the course. But she seems more like, oh my God, I do not need this from you right now. Like,
yeah. And I think she's just experiencing an interchange, and Dory and the dad are unaware of the interchange. And because she's not vulnerable with them, they have no way of knowing about it. So they think everything is just status quo. Like, you're so close to this Avery Cup, you're so close to your goal. And they don't understand that them acting the way they've always acted is now affecting her in this totally new way. It's interesting. It's an interesting character dynamic. I like this book, so I support it. It was something that I was interested in, because this is another thing where an easy thing for a soap opera to do would be to have the dad be really unreasonable. And when what's about to happen is that a boy is entering her life, the dad could be like, no way, you know, and then Kristen's reaction would be to rebel. And what happens is a much more reasonable, softer version of that. So let's get into that, shall we? Kristen, when she has this hour to kill before practice, she goes and sees that a bunch of girls who she knows by sight, but nothing more, Amy Sutton, Carol Walker, your old friend, Jessica. They're all watching Bruce Patman and some dude named Adam Tyner play tennis. And so Kristen comes over and watches, and then Bruce comes and like real slickly like walks up to her and says, "So champ," he said in a teasing voice, "how'd I do?" Kristen looked at him seriously. "Not bad," she said, "but you'd do better if you kept your arm completely straight on your backhand. Also, you're taking 2 steps when you serve instead of 1. She frowned. "And always keep your eye on the ball." Bruce was silent for a minute. He rolled back and forth on his feet, looking at her. "Thanks," he said shortly, then turned back to Adam. Kristen saw that he had paid attention to what she said. His next game was 10 times better. He won by a satisfying margin. So, you know, he's a little bit like, all right, whatever. But then he does what she says. It goes way better. But then Kristen plays a game with him. Like, she gets coaxed into playing a match with him. And there's this, you know, at first you think like, oh, well, she's going to cream him because he's not that good. But then I had to go back and reread this because essentially what happens, correct me if I'm wrong, is she throws the game because she starts thinking about how it would make him feel bad to lose to a girl.
Yeah, I also highlighted it. I thought it was weird that she said she had never played with anyone from school before. Like,
yeah, that is weird.
Never played for her own school. She had only ever played like in like kind of public community leagues. Like, that seems weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of logistical things that are weird in this book, as much as the plot is great. Like, there's a scene later on in the book when Jessica and Elizabeth, because Jessica has been talked into getting a little sister too, they're having a competition to see who can bake the most cookies that taste the best. And it says that Jessica and her girl cooked 5 dozen cookies, and Elizabeth and her girl only cooked 3 dozen, but they tasted way better. But I was thinking about this house, and I was like, how many ovens are there in this kitchen? Because you can't, I mean, maybe there are 2. That is heard of, but there have to be at least 2, because otherwise there's no way that you could have a timed competition for people that are baking at the same time, and one of them has 5 dozen and the other has 3 dozen.
My logistical sticking point of this entire book was this girl's mother was a famous tennis player that won the U.S. Open. It says that.
Yes.
And was qualifying.
Maybe that's the trophy
Wimbledon.
She was carrying.
Was qualifying for Wimbledon, was on the way. I went back and read that. You're right. She was on the way and was killed tragically in a plane crash. And yet nobody.
Yes, you're so right. I didn't catch that. You're totally right. I did think when I read about how she was on her way to Wimbledon when the plane crashed, like, oh my gosh, that would have been national news. International, I should say. Like, that would have been
like when you were in school, if something like crazy happened to one of your classmates, like, everyone knew it.
Yeah. Well, and even if it wasn't your classmate, I feel like we have had many celebrity plane crash deaths in our lives, and I bet like we remember that they happened. You know, even if the person had no connection to, if some famous.
Especially if they had a connection, you would know.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so the cracks are starting to show in the book's logic, but still, the character study aspect we're enjoying. So Kristen basically lets Bruce win, but she's having like stirrings that she's never had before. Like, she never thought about how it would make a boy feel to lose. You roll your eyes at her, but it's okay because she's gonna have her day. But Bruce is kind of into her, and he even like compliments her on like, wow, you gave me such good tips that, you know, I really played great. And he asks her out, and she's like, I'm way too busy. But he
says, I won't take no for an answer.
Wrote that down too at a certain point, literally verbatim. I won't take no for an answer. It's always what you want to see.
Ooh.
But Kristen like doesn't know. She doesn't even know that Bruce has a bad reputation, let alone that that's not a great thing for a dude to say.
How does she not know that?
It's confusing, and it's definitely mysterious.
Like, insanely disconnected.
Yeah, but it's I enjoyed, like, I was expecting Bruce to really wrap her around his finger, to use a phrase that these books like. And instead, what happens is that Kristen is pretty firm. She goes out with him to see a movie or something, but then she's like, I can't stay out any later. Like, I have to go home. I have to go to sleep because I have to be up at 9 o'clock tomorrow for practice. And then that very night he calls, like, he keeps on calling the house, and she puts her foot down. You know, she's not gonna like cave to his pressure to like not care so much about tennis, right?
Yeah, I think they go on a few dates.
Yeah,
and it goes well.
That teaser thing that you're talking about, where that's where he was going to take her to Casey's to have a scoop of ice cream, and she's like, well, I guess I can go. But then when he picks her up, he's like, no, Casey's is dumb. Like, let's go. There's a way better place we can go. And she's like, well, okay, but I only have an hour. I can't stay out late. And then but it's like he's already starting up his Porsche and driving away. And so it's like she's essentially kidnapped for the evening by this guy. And when she gets home 3 hours later, her dad is furious. That's the scene that's in the teaser, because she literally told her dad she'd be back in an hour. But this is where it's like she wanted to be back in an hour too. She didn't want to be gone for 3 hours, but it was out of her control. Do you remember that? Like, having to get rides from people all the time as a kid, and like having it be sort of out of your control sometimes when you got home?
Yes, sort of.
So Bruce starts calling the house. He leaves a bunch of numbers, right? This is before the date that we just talked about, but there's just a funny little anecdote about him leaving a bunch of numbers, and the dad is confused, and he's like, if I'm not mistaken, one of these numbers is for a car phone. And so she calls Bruce on his car phone, and she's just like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy has a car phone. Like, what's his deal? So that was fun. Fun little glimpse into the past.
Your dad had a car phone?
Yeah, I don't think we ever had one. But whenever this book was written, which is probably like 89, it was, March of 89. It was like, whoa. You must be fancy, or at least that's what the writers are getting across. So, we have more conversations about this growing pressure. Dory gives some interesting advice to Kristen. It's like she says things like, when Kristen is complaining about all the pressure that she's under, Dory says, you have to remember that the will to win is yours and yours alone. Neither your father nor I can give you that. If you feel we've been pressuring you. She let her voice trail off, so it sounded almost like a question. And Kristen is basically like, I don't know, they come to an agreement that maybe what Kristen needs is a little bit less pressure. And she's like, oh, well, it's a good thing you say that. I'm happy to hear that, because I decided that I want to go to this party. Bruce has invited her to a party, his parents' big party at the country club, which is something that's like the big party of this book, I guess. And she isn't sure if she wants to go, because she doesn't feel like, after the ice cream thing, like, Bruce doesn't really appreciate how serious she is. Like, she has an interesting thought, like, if he is the right guy for her, like, he'll get how much she cares about tennis, and like, like, she has this very sane thought. And but she decides that she wants to go to this party. And like, the dad clearly does not like this idea, because he's a little bit nervous that she's like throwing away her tennis career because of this guy, Bruce, who he's never met. But Dory says, I think Kristen is right about something. We've both been doing a lot of pushing for a long time now. Kristen's 16. If she makes the pro team, she'll be doing a lot of international traveling. She'll have some tough decisions to make, and we won't be there to help her. If we seem like we've been over-involved, it's because we both love you so much, Kristen. We want what you want, or what we thought you wanted. In any case, I think it's important that you learn to make these choices on your own. If the party matters, fine. You're an athlete. You know your own limits and your own potential. The bottom line is, there's nothing anyone can do out there to make you win, but you. So it's all just a lot of these like very like wise platitudes in this book, or platitudes might be selling it a little short, but there's a lot of that kind of talk in the book.
I also noted, like, it literally says, like, Dory looked at her in complete astonishment before she could say a word. Kristen broke into a run towards the clubhouse. All she wanted was to be alone. Next sentence. Wow, Kim Eggers explained as she saw the Wakefield Spanish-tiled kitchen. No transition.
Nope.
I'm like, this just like doesn't care. No transition whatsoever.
Yeah. So I think what's just happened there in the scene you're describing is that like throughout the like last half of this book, or like the middle section, I guess, Kristen is having these various competitions and she's winning the competitions, but it's proving very difficult for her. She knows that she's really having a hard time when in fact it should be really easy for her. And sometimes that's because she's not getting much sleep, because even though she gets home on time from her date, she's lying awake for hours, like thinking about it, or she overslept, you know, one day when she's supposed to come to rehearsal. And so rehearsal. I mean practice, tennis practice. So that's kind of what's going on in her life. We haven't said anything about Emily Brown, who is, you know, Kristen has agreed to take her on as a little sister, basically because she thinks that she can bring Emily with her to watch her matches, which she does, and Emily loves it. And that kind of seeing how much Emily loves it is, I don't know, it's transforming Kristen in some way.
I think I thought that she would be a much bigger character than she is. They kind of set her up like this will kind of be a big sticking point of the book, and it doesn't end up being that big. Like,
it doesn't create a problem. Like, Emily doesn't create any problems for Kristen. Only,
well, I just mean you don't even spend that much time with her.
That's true.
And she just kind of serves a function of like showing her like, oh God, like remember back when I just loved this. And I feel like that's just the whole point, is she kind of like reminds her of that.
Yeah, that's her point initially. And then she ends up having a little bit more of a linchpin kind of purpose later in the book. But we'll get to that shortly, because I want to talk about this country club party. So we've already had a scene where like Jessica Wakefield keeps on taking her little sister like to the mall and stuff. So she's talking about how like, oh, I need to go to the mall to find a formal dress, because it's like a formal party. And Amy Sutton's going to wear a sexy dress. And Amy Sutton hasn't heard that Bruce Patman invited Kristin Thompson to this. But when Kristen shows up, like she hasn't gotten the memo that it's formal. So she's wearing like a sundress. So she instantly feels out of place. She sees Bruce, who partly coaxed her there by saying that he wanted to introduce her to his parents. But as soon as he says that he's going to do that, then Amy comes up and puts her arm in Bruce's, and like Bruce basically like forgets about Kristen. Kristen is instantly turned off by this. So she drifts over to the bar where she runs into Winston Egbert, and I have to read what Winston says about Bruce because it's just like the best thing anybody's ever said about Bruce. Come here often? Winston Egbert asked teasingly, joining her in line for soft drinks. Kristen turned to him with a grateful smile. She knew him from class and had always enjoyed his wisecracks. To tell you the truth, no, she said. Is there something I should know about how to behave? Just don't take lessons from our hosts, Winston said wryly. See that? He inclined his head toward the place where Bruce was standing, with Amy snuggled beside him. That's what happens when too much money, good looks, and ego all hit in the same place. Kristen blushed. She had never heard anyone talk about Bruce before. Did he have a bad reputation?
I highlighted that.
She didn't have a chance to ask Winston more about his remark because Bruce was coming toward them, with Amy in tow. Kristen hoped Bruce was coming over to talk to her, but she turned out to be wrong. Bruce stopped to say hello to every single girl in the drink line. He flirted outrageously, asked several girls to dance, and passed Kristen by with a smile no different from the smile he had given everyone else. So she's like, okay, this is not this guy. Like, not only she's not like heartbroken, she's just like, I see this guy sucks. Like, and she's mad at herself for taking the evening out when she could be like resting up for her, like psyching herself up for her big match, like the last tournament win that she needs is the next morning. And she's like, why did I do this? Like, oh well.
Well, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, he's been dating her.
I mean, he invites her.
A lot of his way to invite her says he's wants to introduce her to his parents. And
he really makes it like you have like it would be so important if you were there. You know, it won't be the same without you. And like,
And then barely speaks to her
yeah.
once she's there. It seems like, was he deliberately trying to mess with her?
I don't think he was, but I do think that there's some kind of like the like playing hard to get. Not that she was playing hard to get, but that he is somehow entranced or intrigued by her unwillingness to just fall head over heels for him. You know, she's like setting boundaries, and he's like, I feel like that's baiting him a little bit, not on purpose, but that's how he's responding to
But
it.
I feel like, and I get that the other girl was like easier, kind
Sure.
of. So he was
Katie's
happy.
doing air quotes, gladiators.
He was happier to go with her. But like, to me, it should have been like, he sees her, like Kristen, at the party first before this other girl.
Yeah, Amy.
Like, he would have like immediately gone to talk to her and then kind of got distracted by the other girl. And you're like, okay, I get it. But this is almost like he like barely even acknowledges her at all.
Yeah.
And I'm like, then what are you, like,
Yeah, it's fucked up. And
what
she
are
is,
you doing?
and her feeling about this is like, boy, I sure was dumb. Like, am I sorry that I went to the party at all? And part of her is like, maybe I'm not sorry that I went, because now at least I don't have, like, I know what I'm missing and it's not much and I don't care. But unfortunately, it does, you know, screw her up, because she has a really hard match at the tournament the next day against Sharon Owens, and she loses.
Yep,
She loses
it's a
hard.
qualifying match.
And Nick Wiley is like, oh man, I guess you can be our alternate, but that's really rough. And she is just like in tears. She can barely face her father and Dory, like they're not gonna love her anymore. And Emily is gonna be so disappointed that she lost, you know, she's just feels that she's let everybody down.
Mm-hmm.
But that thankfully kind of forces a reckoning, in part because Emily, like, has a couple days later, Emily tells her that she has something to tell her, but she's afraid that if she tells her, then Kristen won't want to be her friend anymore. And remember, this is a little girl talking to, like, a 9-year-old talking to a 16-year-old. And what Emily reveals is that she had been trying out to get into a tennis camp, and she wasn't accepted because she wasn't good enough. And Emily is shocked when Kristen is like, you know, oh, I don't want to, like, I don't love you any less. I mean, it's a little grandiose for terms, but like,
Yeah.
I don't care about you any less, you know, just because of that. Like, I didn't like you because you like tennis, you know, but if you want to, we can work hard for next time. And she realizes that that's exactly what her dad and Dory have been telling her, that they were supporting her tennis dreams because she said that she wanted it, not because they needed her to be great.
And she kind of just spills everything out to her father and her tennis coach, that's also like basically her aunt in a way. She was like her mom's best friend, and now has become her dad's best friend, and is over at the house for dinner every night. And she just kind of spills everything, and how she feels like she's not as good as her mother, and she can't stand up to the legacy of her mother. And her tennis coach, her mom's best friend, was like, child,
Yeah.
here's the thing. Your mom was going to quit.
Yeah. Wimbledon
your
was going to be her
mom-
last match.
Yeah.
She wanted to live a normal life too. You know,
Yep.
she would be so proud of you, but like, she wouldn't be proud of you for being a good tennis player. Like, she would be proud of that, but like, she would love you so much regardless of what you did. Like, you don't have to, I mean, the line is, she wanted a normal life. She wanted to have time to watch her daughter grow up. Dory blinked back tears. She never ended up getting the chance, but I know if she were alive today, she'd take you in her arms and say that being a winner in life doesn't depend on one match or even a dozen matches. And you are a winner, Kristin Thompson. Do you hear me?
And then she cries and says she misses her.
And yeah.
And also, like, earlier on, she says, like, they never talk about her mom. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so fucking sad.
Yeah. And the dad at one point says, like, he says something like, oh, I forget myself. You know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be so hard on you. And then he leaves, and Kristen says to Dory, he means he forgets I'm not my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all so sad. But then once this catharsis happens, lo and behold, magical phone call. Poor Sharon Owens has sprained her ankle, and Nick Wiley has called to say that he needs Kristen to be he needs Kristen to come in and like play matches now. Like, she's the alternate, like she's getting called up. And she's like, okay, well, would this just be for a short time? And he's like, listen, I was really surprised that you didn't win this. So if you are playing well, then I think there's no reason why you can't, stay as our permanent alternate kind of. And then when a spot opens up, you can take that spot. And Kristen has already, like, in a different book, maybe the main character would have realized that she didn't care about sports anymore. But that's not what happened. Like, by the time we get to that point in this book, Kristen has already decided that she actually does want to recommit to trying to get onto Nick Wiley's team again next year. Like, she's going to try even harder, and she's going to do it for herself. She's not going to do it for her dad. She's not going to do it for Dory. She's going to do it because it's what she wants. So it's easy for her to say, yes, I do want to do that. But she's also already said, yes, I want to take Emily to the ice cream party. Like, she's going to try to find a way to find some balance in her life. And everyone's so happy for her. And she kicks ass at the tournament that she has to play, like, the next day or like 2 days from then. And she's a professional tennis player by the end of the book.
And she can't believe she ever wasted a moment on Bruce Patman and imagining a different life for herself.
Well,
which is a little...
It's not the ending that you expect this book to have, right? Like, you don't expect the lesson to be like, yeah, it's actually not important that you have a normal teen life.
Part of my takeaway was like, then did the entire book waste our time?
The one thing that I think really does change, that Kristen changes, is that she does now have a connection and a relationship to some people at school. Like, people know who she is and care about her, and vice versa. It's not just her and tennis and Dory and her dad, which really had been like her whole world when the book started. She has some new friends. She's thinking about maybe a boyfriend. And I have got to read the most delicious passage in the whole book. I'm jumping back a little bit because this is before Nick Wiley calls and she becomes a pro and everything. But it's when she's left the country club party without saying goodbye to anybody, Bruce included. When Kristen shows up to school, she tried to walk past without stopping to say hello, but Bruce stepped in front of her, making little tisk-tisk motions with his finger. Now, wait a minute, he scolded her with a knowing little smile. Just where do you think you're going? Are you even going to explain where you ran off to on Saturday night? I felt like a total jerk. I was just about to dance with you when Kristen looked coldly at him. That's a weird sentence. Kristen looked coldly at him. Listen, I've got a lot of stuff to do, she said, trying hard to keep her self-control. She couldn't believe she had ever found Bruce Patman interesting. Now that she knew him a little better, she could tell how incredibly arrogant he was. The cocksure way he was grinning at her right now made her angry. Boy, she thought, I really lost my head for a while there. I sure hope next time, if there is a next time, I show a little bit better taste. She started to push past Bruce, but he put a restraining hand on her arm. You're not going to walk off without an explanation, are you? He demanded hotly. Look, Bruce, Kristen said, pulling her arm away from his touch. I don't owe you anything, least of all an explanation. In case you don't remember, you didn't pay one bit of attention to me the whole evening, and I happened to have had a match, a very important match, the following morning. If you worried about anyone, even half as much as you worry about yourself, you would have remembered that. Without another word, she stomped off into the building, leaving Bruce staring after her with his mouth hanging open. And I wrote in my notes, my fucking hero.
She has a very low bullshit tolerance.
Yeah.
Like when she's at the party and she's like, all right, I know what's going on. Like, she doesn't stay forever. Like, I think they said by 9:30 she was out the flipping door. Like, she was like, nah, I'm not going to wait around for this. And she leaves. And then when he tries to butter her up the next day, she's like, nah, I'm not here for this. And it's not even like, she doesn't even really wallow over him. She's more like, I can't believe I even wasted any time with you
Yeah.
at all. And I'm definitely not going to expend any more emotional energy on this.
This passage continued that, she felt good telling Bruce, what she thought. And it seemed like maybe a girl had never done that to Bruce before. But it goes on. She felt even better knowing that what had seemed like conflict between her rigorously disciplined tennis life and her sudden desire to lead a normal life hadn't really been a conflict at all. She had been flattered by Bruce's attention, but the truth was, she hated everything Bruce stood for. So, all right, that's clear enough. I mean, that does get back to your point of well, so what was the point of this book then, if there was no conflict at all? But it was the process of her having that realization and understanding that she could be doing something for herself and not for her father, not for her, pseudo aunt, soon to be potentially stepmother, as we find out.
I immediately was like, oh, they're together, or they're gonna end up together by the end of the book.
I did not see that coming. I don't know what that says about me, but she's really happy about it because Dory is a big part of her life.
Yeah, and then she wins because we already went back to that.
She creams the girl that in the tournament. She's on her way, really, to becoming.
And then everyone at school's celebrating her win.
Yeah, and she's finished her American Dream paper.
Mm-hmm. And then everyone's mad, and everyone's happy for her, and Bruce is mad and miffed that everyone's congratulating her, and he says she doesn't have the spirit of a real champ.
I thought he said that before she wins her game, but regardless, and then he wants to talk to her again after she won. And
I think it's right before the Avery
Cup. Tell
her
So he has no faith in her because she doesn't have the spirit of a champ. Probably doesn't help that he thinks he can beat her at tennis because she let him win that one time. This is why you don't do that. But then as soon as she does win, he's he wants to be all up in her grill again, and she's not having it. Because like you said, low bullshit tolerance, which is great. Mm-hmm. And then, things wrap up with just a little foreshadowing. Mr. Collins returns. Again, I was looking closely for some kind of untoward sentences here, but all he does is he talks about how there's going to be a writing contest coming up, and the winner of the writing contest gets to be the king or queen of the Citizens' Day Ball. And the subject of the essay contest, did you clock this, Katie? It is Sweet Valley in the year 2000.
Yeah, I saw that.
Looking forward to more about that.
Yep.
We can talk more about Second Chance in the extra drama episode, but for now, I guess we can reveal why the book was called Second Chance. I think it's because Kristen got a second chance to be on Nick Wiley's professional soccer team. I mean, damn it, I said it again. Professional tennis team.
And her father got a second chance at love.
Aw, yeah, Neil. Good for you, Neil. At this point, I've asked you so many times whether you're a Jessica or an Elizabeth. I can't imagine that your answer would have changed based on the events of this book.
I think every time I say I'm I'll relate to Enid more than...
Yeah. Enid is good in this book. She's a very good girl. She does a lot of good things. She's a real good citizen. She should be the queen of the Citizens' Day Ball.
Yeah.
but I don't know how good of a writer she is. So it's kind of weird that designation is based on an essay.
Yeah.
Gladiators, thank you so much for listening to us talk about Second Chance. Do you have anything you want to plug?
I mean, if you haven't already, I guess my only thing to plug would be to watch Eric Andre's movie Bad Trip on Netflix that I devoted 2 years of my life working on. So that's my only thing.
It's so good. Definitely, if you have access to Netflix or access to Bad Trip on Netflix, do watch it and you won't be disappointed. You can find out about what's going on in Sweet Valley Diaries world by following at Sweet Valley on Twitter, or better yet, at Sweet Valley Diaries on Instagram. You can send me an email, sweetvalleydiaries@me.com. I guess I'll go ahead and put in another plug for my newsletter, Metaphoria, which is not about Sweet Valley High, but after the last episode aired, I know a couple of you did subscribe to the newsletter, so thank you for that. It comes out every week, and you can find out, you can read it or subscribe to it by visiting flaxbart.substack.com, but like a lot of newsletters, when you subscribe, it just comes right into your email inbox. Tune in next week for some more talk about Second Chance. And until then, I hope everybody's having a great summer. So it's summer now.
Yeah, it's here.
So does that mean Miss America?
Let's talk about Second Chance. What do you think about that?
Was that being the name of the book?
No, I literally just mean, let's talk about what happens in this book. Instead of just take a little detour from talking about.
They picked it. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think the name is pretty straightforward. But if I explain what it means right now, it'll be a super spoiler. So I have to hang on until the end.